physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish, free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope of the gospel. This is the gospel, my friend. It has been proclaimed in all country.
Good morning. If immediately after church you do not see me in the foyer and I do not greet you, which I won't be doing, do not be offended. We are on our way out of town. We're going on a cruise. Our whole family, we're leaving right after church, so I'm going to make a beeline for the door. It's more important for me not to miss the boat and upset my wife than it is to offend you. Right? Jack's giving me 2 thumbs up on that one. So we're going to be leaving. Actually, we can go ahead and stand and sing now. That way we could get there. We're leaving out of Baltimore, so we have to drive down there. So we're going to get right out of here. But I do want to talk about this passage, Reconciled in Christ. I got an iPad the other day, and I didn't know how to use it. I still am not very good with it, but I got one. And was just kind of playing around, and I didn't know what I could do with it. I know they're very powerful machines. I wasn't sure what I could do with it, and so I went on just the internet, and I typed in like 10 best apps, for an iPad. And then I went to like 25 best apps for an iPad. So I started browsing through these apps, and one of the top-rated ones was this Google Earth map. Now, everybody with an iPad is going to get their iPad out, and they're going to go to Google Earth. They're going to be doing that during the sermon. It's really neat, and it's kind of like MapQuest, but it's like MapQuest on steroids. You can zoom into a location. You can actually, it has a little arrow, and you can type in, wherever your location is. Like, for example, when I was here the other day in the office, I typed our church in, and it zooms in on the building. And you can actually see cars in the parking lot. It's incredible. You can see the clothing bin, that we have by the entrance. And just really zooms in, and you can change the angle, and it as close as you want to get, it'll zoom in. It's kind of freaky. You can type in your home address, and there's our pool. And we can even see that it's covered. Obviously, it was taken in the wintertime, or at least at a moment where I had not uncovered the pool yet. But it's kind of freaky because you can really zoom in and get some very, very close detail on things. If you want to leave that location and go somewhere else, like let's say I want to type in Bahamas. You can type that in, and then you zoom out. And it's like you're in a rocket ship, and you blast off, and you literally see the globe like this, and you go over, whatever you type in. It's like you're either in an airplane or a rocket, depending on how far you're going. And you zoom out, and then you zoom right back in. And it actually showed me the port where all the cruise ships are going to be in the Bahamas. So this is what I did for like hours the other night. And this is what I've come to the conclusion that my iPad is useful for, is to kill time. But this Google Earth app is neat, and I was going to actually give you a demonstration, but I didn't have time to get it together, and I don't want to overload the control room. But this app makes you feel small when you start playing with it because of the vastness of our world. It makes you realize the vastness of our world, the cosmos that we're a part of, and how tiny we are in the midst of that. And it's pretty overwhelming when you play with it. It's kind of one of these things that it's like a paradigm shift. I'm used to my mom bought me a globe back when I graduated, and it's like this thing in my office that spins around. Well, who needs a globe when you got Google Earth, right? I mean, it's incredible. So it just makes you feel small. It's a very interesting thing. The camera image will zoom in and out, and you get various glimpses of the earth in different locations. Well, this hymn that we just read, Harry just read, in Colossians 1, is like the Google Earth view of the gospel. I think a lot of times as Christians, we think deeply about our relationship with Christ, and we should. But sometimes we can get so focused on it's about me or it's about what Jesus does for me, that we forget what Jesus did for the entire cosmos. And what Paul is pointing out to these Christians in Colossae is, take no offense at this, but the story is much bigger than you. Right? God's chief plan at the beginning of creation was not to save you, Steve Kasha, not to hurt your feelings, but that wasn't his plan. You're part of the overall plan, but his plan was to reconcile the cosmos. So when Adam and Eve fell, everything fell. The whole entire earth fell. We read in Genesis about the animals are cursed, the ground is cursed, everything is cursed. And so this Christ hymn, this beginning of Colossians, is Paul's sort of summary of sort of the Google Earth, presentation of the gospel, and this is what God did in Jesus Christ. And you kind of have to zoom out, and Paul kind of zooms out, and he gives you this larger picture. I like what N.T. Wright, one of my favorite authors, said about this hymn. This is a hymn that probably preceded Paul. It was probably one that he used and incorporated it into the letter. I don't know how your Bible prints it, but it's actually a poem. And sometimes we just put it in paragraphs and we may lose that, but it really has rhyme and meter to it, and it's a beautiful, beautiful passage. It's worth going quite slowly through the poem and pondering the depths of meaning that are to be found in it. Christianity isn't simply about a particular way of being religious. It isn't about a particular system for how to be saved here or hereafter. It isn't simply a different way of holiness. Christianity is about Jesus Christ. In this poem, one of the very earliest Christian poems ever written, is as good a place to start exploring it as any. This is what the Colossians needed to know, and we today need to rediscover. You've heard the phrase, you miss the forest for the trees, right? You get so focused on something minutely that you forget that there's a larger picture. That's what Paul is kind of getting at here. He's kind of painting with broad strokes sort of the cosmic reconciliation that Jesus has brought through his death on the cross. And so Jesus he's not just, the cross is not just the moment where he forgives sinners, human beings who have fallen from God, but it's that moment where he redeems the whole entire created world and begins to renew it. And it's that moment where he begins this process. So again, this hymn's kind of the Google Earth view of the gospel. So I'm going to kind of break it down. Paul basically says three main points here. And we're not going to go back and reread it. I'm going to challenge you at the end of the sermon to do that this week. But number one, when we look at Jesus, we discover who God is. This is front and center for Paul, is that when we say the name Jesus Christ, and when we pray to Jesus Christ, and when we say that name on our lips, and when we talk about Jesus Christ, we are talking about God himself. We are talking about deity. We are talking about God. I think the risk is that we talk about a human being named Jesus. And so what Paul is trying to shatter is any notion that Jesus is simply a human being. He's God. And he represents God, and he reflects God. By looking at Jesus, we discover who God is. He basically says he's the mirror image of God. He's the exact representation of his being. You may have maybe a room in your house where if you're in one room and somebody's in another room, but you can't see them because there's a wall. But yet if you look out the doorway, there may be a mirror on the wall and you can actually see the person, in the next room, even though there's a wall there. That's kind of the idea here. We don't see God directly because there's a wall. But when we look out the door and see Jesus' reflection in the mirror in the other room, we're looking at the face of God himself. So when we read these stories about Jesus in the Gospels and we reflect on what the New Testament has to say about him, we are reflecting on God himself. No one has ever seen God, but in Jesus, he has come near to us and he has become one of us. There's a difference between sending a sympathy card and being empathetic with someone's situation. A sympathy card is a nice gesture, right? I'm sorry that you're going through what you're going through. But in reality, a sympathy card is not the same as empathy. Empathy is when you can really feel what they're going through because you've been through it as well. It's the difference between sympathizing and empathizing. In Jesus Christ, God didn't send us a sympathy card. He didn't send us a card that says, I know you're going through a tough time and just want you to know I'm thinking about you. What God does in the gospel, according to Paul, is he is empathizing with us and he is joining us in our pain. He is joining us in our suffering, and yes, he is even joining us in our sin. Right? That's the definition of the cross, is that God takes sin upon himself. So in Jesus, he becomes one of us. And the book of Hebrews goes into great detail about he was made in every way just like us. So God doesn't just send us a card and say, I'm thinking about you. He actually comes and visits us. He actually sits down with us. And he says, I know exactly what you're going through because I went through it myself. Another point that it makes in this poem, it talks about how creation was created by him and through him, and all things are held together by him. Verse 15, all things in him hold together. Jesus holds creation together and he renews it. This is kind of weird. Let me think about that. I mean, how can Jesus hold creation together? And how does he renew it? How does God do that in Jesus Christ? Think about, I don't know, when's the last time you were awed by nature? When's the last time that you just saw something in nature that just took your breath away? I remember the moon like a couple of weeks ago was like the biggest it's ever supposed to be, like ever or something. And it was supposed to be this real bright moon. And I thought, yeah, well, how bright can it be? Right? And so I'm skeptical about that. And so I went outside, and it was overwhelming. I forget the title of it. The actual phrase is actually a scientific phrase for it, but whatever, who cares what it is. But it was very bright, and it was almost like this is the brightest moon I've ever seen. And it kind of took my breath away. I was just in the backyard looking at it and couldn't even really get a clear view of it because of the trees, but it was quite overwhelming. We feed birds in our yard, and we actually got ahead of the game this year and put up our bird houses at the right moment. And there's one where we can actually see, they're all grown up now, but we can actually see the parents feeding the little babies inside this little birdhouse, and their little mouths are open. And I always thought that was just like something that you read in books about little baby birds and how they act like that. Well, when the mother flies there with a worm or whatever, they all just start opening their mouths, like Hannah. Yeah? And that's what they do. And then they feed them, and they fly, and then they get quiet. And that just took my breath away because I'd never seen that before. I mean, I'd never cared about baby birds before, really. And when I saw that, it kind of took my breath away. You've all got experiences of your own, of where nature kind of takes your breath away, and you see the beauty that is nature. The world is full of beauty. That is Jesus Christ. According to Paul, he is the one who has invested creation with its beauty. He holds that beauty together. And every time you see something beautiful in nature, every time you see something beautiful in this world, that's Jesus sustaining this world. You ever think what would happen to this world if God left us up to our own devices? The reason the world has not imploded so far is because of the grace of God and because of Jesus' role in maintaining this beauty. So it's in this sense that he holds all things together. He keeps the world from lapsing into chaos. And so when we look around and we see the beauty around us, that's Jesus. This is not, I understand, this is not typically what you hear when you hear lessons about Jesus. But this is where Paul goes. So the world is full of beauty. But the world is also full of ugliness and evilness. And all of this is summarized in death. It's the worst of all evil in our world. And ever since the fall, it has been a plague among us. It doesn't take long, watch the news or not. I mean, you just hear about it. The violence and the bloodshed and the war and the crime and the sickness, the illnesses. It's like there's a new one every week. The world has some ugly aspects about it, right? The world is not this, raving beautiful place, and that's all it is beautiful. There's a lot of ugliness out there. You think about when children are abducted or things like that. I mean, remember when I read The Shack, Steve and I have talked about that book before. That's an ugly story, until you reach the end. Then it turns out okay. But that's what our world is full of. Our world is full of that kind of thing, and it can really tempt your faith. It can really try you. It really make you question, is Jesus really holding this thing together? And so you kind of have to think about it from two different angles. But as Paul points out, he's the firstborn from among the dead. I forget what verse it is, but he's the firstborn among the dead. Meaning Jesus has defeated the ugliness. Being the firstborn from among the dead, he's the first who has been raised. Jesus defeats the ugliness of our world. Now, we still see it, we still experience it, we still live in it, but he has defeated it. He has showed us in the resurrection a preview of what's to come for all of us. That death does not win. Evil does not win. The world will not implode on itself because God is preserving it, and he preserves it in Jesus Christ, and the resurrection is a testimony to that fact. Life wins. And that's basically Paul's point by pointing out that he's the firstborn from among the dead. And finally, Jesus is what true humanness means in practice. When we look at Jesus, we get a clear glimpse of what it means to be a child of God. We all want to be children of God. We all are children of God. But we want to be obedient children, right? We don't want to be spoiled brats, right? We don't want to be disobedient, obstinate children. So we look to Jesus for that perfect picture of what it means to be a son of God. Not that we're divine and in a sense like him, but he is our pattern for what it means to live a life that looks like God. He is the image of God, the exact representation of his being. So if we want to be like God, if we want to act like God, who do we look to? We look to Jesus Christ. When we say our Father in our prayers, that implies that we are his children. And so Jesus gives us that paradigm. This is what God's children look like. So if our lives look radically different from Jesus, guess what? We have to take stock of what kind of children we really are. This passage is pretty overwhelming when you read it. And I want to challenge you to go home and read it this week, every day, every morning and every evening. It's pretty overpowering. When you see the things that he says about Jesus and how he's the head of the body of the church, the beginning, the firstborn from among the dead, everything, in everything you might have supremacy. God was pleased to have his fullness dwell in him, etc. If you think about it too much, it's like the commercials where I forget what product it is, but the guy's sitting there, and he's in like a preschool class, and he's asking them questions about what happens when a turtle doesn't cross the road, fast enough and things like that. And they give like little answers, then somebody blows his mind and he goes, that's kind of like what this poem is supposed to do. When you read it at the end, you're supposed to go, well, I just can't fathom that. This is beyond my comprehension. Well, welcome to the gospel. The gospel is beyond our comprehension. The gospel is beyond our imagination. And when we read a passage like this, our heads are supposed to explode, right? And keep reading, right? It's the kind of thing that you can read over and over and over again. It's a beautiful poem. It's one of the greatest ever penned. We could plumb the depths of this and never really even get below the surface. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, well, what's in it for me? What does this poem have to say about me? What does this mean for my life? Well, the next several verses indicate where the ordinary Christian is located in this sort of map of the cosmos that we've talked about. He shows us what Jesus has done for the cosmos. Now he's going to tell us where we are. I'm not very good in malls. I get lost very easily. You take me to the King of Prussia Mall. I've walked through it probably 500 times, and I will get just as lost every time I go through it. I guess it's because everything looks the same, and my bearings get kind of messed up, and I have to go find a marquee where it says you're here. And even then, I'm like, it still doesn't mean anything. So it takes me a lot of work, and even ask Joanne. She's scared to death to leave me by myself in a mall because I get lost. I'm like a child. They need that leash that, you stick to them, and they don't ever actually get away. So I need that sign that says you're here. Well, that's basically what Paul is doing in this map, in this poem. You're here. once you were completely alienated, but now you're here. Now you have a place in this kind of Google Earth thing. Right? What Jesus has done for the cosmos, he's done for you. So yes, Steve, God does save you personally from your sins, and that's an important thing to understand. You are part of that. You are now part of that map of this cosmos. If you think about it, everybody in this room who's a Christian, we have two common experiences together. We're all sinners, and we've all been reconciled through Jesus' blood on the cross. Those are two things that bind us inextricably together. This is where that empathy comes in again. When somebody comes to me, and Jack talked about this in Bible class this morning, if somebody comes to me to confess a sin, I don't sit there and say, well, it's okay, God forgives you, and as if I'm some sort of an elite, What makes it powerful is that I, too, am a sinner. And I know how you feel. I may not have done exactly the same sin, but I know how you feel. I know what it feels like to be alienated from God. I know the guilt that you feel. I'm a fellow sinner as well, and that's what makes it so powerful, and that's a shared experience. It's like boot camp. Like that's a shared experience that we all have. I was watching a show the other night. It was about Afghanistan. It was a war show, and how war binds soldiers together in a way that is unmatched in any other aspect of society. That's sort of the world that we live in. And as Christians, that's where we are. We are bound together in sin, but more importantly, we are bound together by being reconciled by Christ's blood on the cross. The aspect that Paul points out. So we don't wallow in our sin, going, no, it's awful, isn't it? I share that, and it just stinks. No, we've been reconciled. We've been redeemed. There's good news. That's what the gospel is all about. So we don't wallow in sin together. We confess our sin together, but we also understand that we're reconciled together. And that binds us inextricably together. Friends, just as Christ reconciles the cosmos, he reconciles the church. His mission is both global and local, if you will. There's a bit of a paradox in verse 23. With you continue in your faith, established and firm, not moved from the hope held out in the gospel. Back in verse 22. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body to present you holy in his sight, without blemish, free from accusation. How many of you are without blemish? How many of us are without blemish? How many of us are free from accusation? There's a bit of a paradox here. God has made us holy. It's a done deal. We talked about it in Bible class, right, Rusty? That's what he does. He cleanses us. He has made us holy. But we have the responsibility to maintain it. So we have to work towards holiness even though it's already been given to us. Again, it's a paradox. It's two things that don't seem to be true, but they actually are. Right? Not shoes. It's a paradox. It's different. Right? God has made us holy, but we have to maintain that holiness. And so there's a bit of responsibility involved here. Take responsibility for your growth and maturity in faith. We all have a personal faith, and I know I kind of downplay that sometimes, and I don't mean to, but it's an important aspect to understand that each of us are responsible for his or her own faith. I'm not responsible for Warren's faith. I'm not responsible for Eddie's faith. I hope I can help build their faith, but ultimately I'm not going to be judged based on Dave Stevens' faith. I'll be judged on my own. So we all have an individual responsibility to bear, and this is Paul kind of exhorting them to say, you got to maintain this holiness that God has given you because, there's this thing about grieving the Holy Spirit and it being taken from you. So we have to maintain that holiness. We have to maintain that purity, and it's, our responsibility to own that. We live in a world that loves excuses. We love to make excuses. Well, I just can't. This happened to me, and I can't help that. Right? And part of that is true. There's things that happen to me, and I can't help it. Right? But if that's your MO, that's how you answer every crisis that comes into your life, then there's a responsibility point, we have to grab hold of our faith, grab hold of our spiritual lives, and work towards the holiness that has been given to us. To take responsibility for our own faith. In other words, I can't blame Mark and Paul if I'm not growing in faith. Right? I can't blame Kat if I'm not growing in my faith. I can't blame Jack if I'm not growing in my faith. I blame Warren sometimes, but I mean, it's not true. Right? When you look at the cross, the point of this whole passage is that it comes together at the cross. This is this sort of climactic point in this poem. He's reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight. He mentioned the cross earlier. This is the gospel that you heard, and it has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul, have become a servant. Why is the cross so central for Paul? This discussion of reconciliation, this discussion of cosmic cleansing, if you will, why is it so important? Because the cross is where it happens. The cross is this moment in time. It's the one moment in all of history that all the enmity and hostility that was keeping humans and God shut off from one another did its worst to Jesus on the cross. All of God's wrath, the gap that separated us from God, reached this climactic point on the cross. That's why it's such a terrible story. Not just because it's a sad story and Jesus didn't deserve to die, but the agony of the cross. And, I think the gospel writers, are good to give us that detail. And Paul even talks about the agony of the cross in Philippians 2. Jesus didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being obedient to death, but then he says, even death on a cross. So the cross is in a way, it's a beautiful story, but it's terrible. Because this is all of the sins of the world being heaped on one man. It's like a gigantic funnel, and every sin of mine and yours and everybody's is poured together on this one person. That's why the cross is so nasty. That's why the story, it really, tugs at your heartstrings. Quite literally, Jesus is where God and humanity meet in order to be reconciled, and that happens on the cross. The cross is not a tragic end to like a Greek tragedy or something like that. The cross is not a tragic end to an otherwise beautiful life. The cross is not an unfortunate end that, it's kind of unfortunate how it ended that way. No, this was God's plan. This was his plan of reconciliation, that all that evil and ugliness that we talked about earlier reaches its climactic point on Jesus on the cross. You think our world is bad? Well, it can be. I understand that. But it was worse at the cross. Because all of that evil that we see is dumped on that one man. If it were not for the resurrection, it would be an awful story. But the resurrection is the triumph. And that's what Paul is getting at. So the cross is at the center, isn't it? So when we talk about this reconciliation, when we talk about God redeeming all of the fallen world, all of the cosmos, the cross is at the center. I don't know what Christianity means to you. I don't know what you hear, when I say that term. But if it means anything less than the cross of Christ, anything less than that bridge between holy God and unholy humanity, anything less than the moment when you were placed back on the map, you need to read this poem again. You need to keep reading it until you understand that it's at that moment that you were given identity. It was at that moment where you were lost, you were found. It's that moment where you were placed back on the map. It's that important. Just as Jesus reconciles the whole entire cosmos, he reconciles the church. I've intentionally painted this sort of big picture of the cosmos and this sort of kind of outer space type thing, because that's sort of beyond our imagination. It's sort of beyond our conception. Like I can look at my backyard and I can keep that within my scope of reference, but I can't see beyond the here and now. I can't see beyond my planet. I can with a telescope, but that's even, doesn't even scratch the surface. But all of that I can't see, and all that is